Welcome to Out of Plaece, where we speak to the ones who are challenging the status quo, leading from curiosity, doing things differently, and above all, have felt out of place somewhere along the way.
We've got real stories, honest lessons, a few laughs, and maybe some tears about building an aligned business and life from people who've been there, are there, or just getting started. We're your hosts, Anne and Paul.
You're exactly where you need to be. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the show, Tim. It's lovely to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Paul.
Welcome, Tim.
Before we get into it, let me give everyone a brief introduction. Tim Siegenbeek Van Heukelom's career journey takes us from the front lines of global health in Papua New Guinea to the cutting edge of environmental, social and governance, or ESG technology. His personal journey through adversity has fundamentally shaped how he thinks about impact, purpose and what truly matters. Tim is currently the Chief Impact Officer at Social Suite, where he's helping reshape how companies approach sustainability, one that actually makes an impact. Outside of work, you'll find him trail running through the Australian wilderness, and he's the co-founder of 4 Wild Places, a not-for-profit using sports activism to protect wild places. Tim's professional path and life experience are what make today's conversation so compelling. He's coordinated advocacy for the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria, helping secure commitments totaling over 280 million Australian dollars. In Papua New Guinea, he didn't just observe from the sidelines, he co-founded the PNG Industry Malaria Initiative, helped establish the independent power producers of PNG, and led initiatives at the intersection of public health and renewable energy. In 2008, he decided to leave the Netherlands for Australia, and a sliding doors moment led to him staying here. 3 years ago, Tim faced his own health crisis when he was diagnosed with cancer, an experience that profoundly shifted his perspective on life, purpose, and the legacy we leave behind. Today, he'll share how that journey has influenced not just how he works, but why he works the way he does. Tim, welcome to the show.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that great introduction. Really a pleasure to be here.
And thanks, Anne, and again, welcome, Tim. Really, what a brilliant introduction. I'm not even sure where to start because there's just so much there that we would love to jump into. But I'm sure as we go throughout this session, we'll get into it. Let's start with a bit of a personal journey and maybe perhaps where you experienced a perspective shift. So if we rewind back to 2008, so you are moving from the Netherlands. First of all, whereabouts in the Netherlands did you live?
At the time, I lived in Utrecht, one of the largest cities in the center of the Netherlands, quite well known for big kind of university student life. And that was what I was doing there at the time. Just finished my studies and considering what's next.
So at that transition from the Netherlands to Australia, I believe that you had a kind of moment that you said, is this it? So what was the catalyst for this thought? And what have you learned versus what you expected since you moved here?
Really good question there. And this is what I think in hindsight, a lot of things become clearer. So at the time, you don't always realize exactly when you're in the moment. But thinking about that time and that moment, I was early 20s. I just finished 2 law degrees at the Utrecht University in the Netherlands, started my first job in The Hague. And for the first 6 months there, commuting every day there, I just thought, is this it? And in a way that, you're all familiar with the midlife crisis, but a newer phenomena is more the quarter life crisis. My brother actually wrote a book about that, so that kind of resonated. And it was around that thinking, is this what I'm going to do? There must be more than just, early 20s getting in this job. I'd done everything to the book, done everything I should have been doing, what people expect or think that you should be doing. But I felt something was literally out of place. It wasn't me. It wasn't what I was ready for. So I really had enjoyed up to that point studying. And I think over time, I've been a slow learner, but I've really learned to learn and love to learn. So by the time I'd finished a master's degree at Public International Law, I really enjoyed that. And I thought, if only I can extend that process of learning which almost organically I could. I found a scholarship, I found a place in London at the university, and everything was set. At the time, I had a girlfriend. We worked out I can commute for a year, we can work that out, no problem. But then that sliding doors moment occurred when, for some reason, I ended up at I think some kind of university fair where universities from around the world are trying to just sell themselves. And the University of Sydney was represented there. And there was a gentleman there that, in the end, did a tremendous job, I guess, because he sold it to me. And not just to me, but to my partner, the two of us wandering around. I knew what my plan was, but he just made me question everything. And by just saying, well, if you go to London, you might as well go to Sydney. My girlfriend had been there, said, yeah, well, if you go there, I'll come with you. And why not? Like, why wouldn't we go to the other side of the world? And that started as a thought experiment, like, why wouldn't we go, or why would we go? And within a year, everything just automatically fell into place. And the scholarship was transferable, the visas worked itself out, and we just left, not just for a year to study, but indefinitely to really sell everything, go there and start a new life. Now, that's not unique per se. I think a lot of people go through these things. But I think what made it more interesting personally for me is that some years later, when I think must have been 5 or 8 years after I'd made that move, I was back in the Netherlands and spoke to one of my brothers, and he flagged with me. He just looked at me and said, "You're much happier now. What you've done, that decision, like, I miss you and I'd rather have you be here with the family, with everyone. But I think you've done the best thing you could have done for yourself. You found your place and you had to go all the way to the other side of the world. But in terms of the way I see and hear you speak, the people, the land, the work you're doing, you weren't happy here first. And it wasn't terrible, but you weren't happy. But you've made a step, you've taken action. And through, I guess, that sliding doors moment, I ended up into the place where I still am at the moment. And this is what I call home now. And that's hard for some people to understand. They often ask me, "Oh, how often do you go home?" And I'm like, "Well, I am home." "Oh, you mean back to the Netherlands?" "Well, now and then." So that was a really interesting experience, I think, is for me, is to realize that at the time I subconsciously realized that I wasn't at the right spot at the right time or doing the right thing. And something came on my path, which I grabbed with both hands, got support from both in my partner and my family. Everyone supported that change, and it worked out.
Yeah, which is crazy if you think about, if you go to the depth of, you had that sliding door moment where one time you're going to, you might be moving to London, then suddenly you are planning to come to Sydney with your partner. When you move to London, you're going to do the distance relationship. So at that stage in your life, like, that could have really shaped you into being a completely different person had you moved to London and you had that environmental influence. That is a sliding door moment. That is such a change of path compared to where you thought you might have been going. Is there anything that has been really different since you've moved here? Or you expected it to be different? Did you know much about Australia before you moved here?
And that's the interesting thing. We had about a year to get used to the idea, but thinking about it, I didn't really make much of an effort. I trusted my partner at the time. She'd been here for just over a year, said it's fantastic. And I just went on that. I didn't do a lot of research. I looked at the university because that's where I would start. I thought, sounds good, looks good, great. But it was a very organic, let's start this adventure and see where it lands. So people ask me, so are you emigrating? Are you moving? I said, well, I'm going indefinitely. So I'm not going for a year. I can't say if it's permanent. So in a way, I didn't really know what to expect. But I think over time now, it has been really interesting to think about the differences in a lot of ways. Like, initially, where you come to a new culture, a new country, and yes, it's the West, as we call it. So it's not that different, but there's always small things which you find in the way people think and do in culture, but also practical things. Like the internet speed initially was, not up to what I was used to in Europe. So there's little things that you just like, Bet and I are like, well, really? But a lot of things change, of course. So technology changes, things catch up. But there will always be things, I think, that coming from a different culture, you just notice. And I think one of the things that took me a long time, and I'm still checking this with other Dutch people, but I feel that there's a very different way in, let's call it discussion. So say you have a group of people, they're having a discussion, and I think that Dutch people, as you know, as you may know, is they're known as being pretty kind of, bold, straight to the point, and they'll just tell you as it is, and they won't wait for it. And I think that's true to a degree. But the main thing is how that plays out as well in, say, a more corporate setting. For instance, what I've seen is that I realized this the other day where there was a group of Dutch corporates meeting up once a month, and I just joined that. And I thought, this is great, interesting. So someone's talking about a topic. There were no lengthy introductions, just straight to the point. You get 10, 15 minutes, and then it was discussion, question and answer. But while it was facilitated, it was much more organic, as in someone just don't put up their hand or wait for someone else to enter, just throw in the question and someone will bounce off that. But they don't wait per se for everyone to finish their sentence, which is very much speaking over someone in Australian culture, which you don't do. You wait for everyone to finish and then you might put up your hand. The Dutch don't do it that way. So that's something I had to learn as well in my corporate life, that say in a board meeting there, you just wait for everyone. You can't just bounce off someone's idea. That is seen as disrespectful. And those things are there's always those things that you learn between cultures that are quite interesting. That's one of the things that only recently came to mind, like, hey, that's a real difference there.
And do you find that with now that you kind of reconnect with that community of people who are Dutch, do you find that you've kind of relearning some of those things? Like you'll feel more comfortable kind of jumping into the conversation now with them?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely right. Now that I better understand the difference, it's much easier to use that in the right situation, in the right context, and to understand the difference as well. Once you're aware of that, say in that context with Dutch people, it's a lot easier to do that and know that that is, I guess, the normal. Whereas to be a little bit careful in what situation you are, say in Australia or any other culture where that might be not seen as respectful or the normal way of operation. So it's something that I'm aware of. And I think there've been more of those things over time where you just learn to be aware of cultural differences. And that's one of the things I noticed as well is I did a lot of work in Papua New Guinea, very different culture there. And one of the things that really kind of was quite striking, I found, is that they have such a different understanding of what a contract is. To us, a contract is something you agree and you write down and you put your signature on, and that is now set in stone almost. But to them, it's a living and breathing agreement that at any point in time can be renegotiated. So if you agree something today, that's still up for discussion tomorrow. So that's really hard then between our way of thinking about a contract and trying to do a job or work or getting something done and getting agreements on over what are we going to do together for 20 years. If that is on the one hand locked in and on the other hand, it is open for discussion at any point in time.
I just have one more question on this topic. When you first moved here, and obviously your behavioral kind of instincts are to, potentially jump in mid-conversation when someone's talking. When you first moved to Australia and you were adjusting to waiting for people to finish their sentence and things like that, did you ever find yourself jumping in and being called out as being rude or having to kind of explain yourself? That was a cultural shift you're getting used to.
Yeah, it was a very clear moment that I think first realized that, and that was indeed in a board meeting or just post that meeting where I think the CFO at the end of the meeting took me aside and said, "You just talked over one of the directors." And I just didn't understand what she meant. She had to spell it out to me, like what that meant. And I thought, but we're just sparring. We're just having a discussion, right? No, you spoke over him. You didn't let him finish his sentence. And that started me to realize, that is a thing that is a big issue, apparently. And then I asked around and I learned that was a big issue for a lot of people. Well, to me, that never was a big issue. The people that I used to discuss, spar, work with so far.
I kind of want to just go back into your time at P&G, actually, seeing how you've spoken about that. So there you co-founded the Industry Malaria Initiative and you worked on renewable energy projects. Besides like kind of the contracts piece, what else did you find interesting in terms of the complexity of working in that environment?
I think that it's a very complex and culturally diverse country. And what that means is that we're all Papua New Guineans, but there's a lot of different ethnic groups there. They all have slightly different cultures, ways of doing thinking. And just initially adjusting to that is how people work and how people think, and trying to just make sense of things that, again, to a maybe Westerner are logical. Like a good example is that I've done a lot of work actually on the ground, going to villages and then sitting there all day with additional either local Papua New Guineans that I worked with or potentially other people from various countries to work on land agreements. So talking to local people about their land and all the land they had that we wanted to, put a lease on some of that land to do something with it. So you spend a lot of time there. And that is not you show up for a meeting at midday and then at 1 o'clock you go and you had an hour good discussion. You show up really early and then you get introductions and welcomes and everyone needs to say something formally every day. And then the local women will make you food and drink. So it's a whole day affair. And that is day after day. So there's a lot of these things that just take time. Time is a very different concept there. So time, it just, you just have to take the time. It's patience and persistence to build that relationship. But one of the things I realized is that there's often a lot of, I guess, do-goods that we're trying to impose on people. And some of them are questionable, others not so much. But there's always that question, like they have their own very old culture. They're still around. They're doing, in their way, relatively well. From our Western perspective, we might say they're doing not so well. Like there's a lot of disease. Most of the country doesn't have running water or electricity. But to them, they're living, subsisting in their villages and their gardens, and they're living a good life. So what is a good life? Who's up to decide that? And then are we then, as Westerners, we put in running water and take it to the edge of the village and say, we put the water there, you just connect the village. That's your job now, but we got it to the village. And I've seen that where cases where it's been there for 10 years and no one bothered to connect it because they don't care. It's not important to them. The same with electricity sometimes. And then the flip side of that is I've been to parts where when I was working in public health, where there's some aid posts, or health centers, but this is extremely remote in the highlands and mostly women that go to the health center with their kids. And this is a hard journey to get there. It can be a whole day walk to get to that aid post. And those women do that. They take their kids, they go there to just get vaccinations, like we can get here in Australia. But for us, you book in with your GP, you go, and if you're lucky, within the hour, you're home and it's all done. Now, you see a lot more and more people in the Western world questioning vaccinations and not doing it. And I always wonder why. And then you see people there understanding the value and seeing kids die around them and walking that 7 hours to that aid post to get that one jab and then walking back again because they understand the value. So it's two things at the same time in one culture versus another culture. That's fascinating to see. And it's hard to understand that at times to make sense of that.
What do you think the difference is between the level of education that we get in the Western world to understand vaccinations and so on, compared to a country like Papua New Guinea?
And that's interesting, like education. I think that we're in a tricky area at the moment with the massive and wide availability of social media and internet and news. Anyone can sprout their opinion on it. And I think the main problem in particular around vaccination is that the young generations of people that have never experienced what it is to have someone die of measles or have a family member with polio. Like it's not in our minds anymore because we vaccinated everyone. So people are now looking at that as those diseases are not around. Why would I put chemicals in my body? But we're doing that for that exact reason is that you don't have any family member that died because we did that and we should keep doing that. But they have a lot of people still die of these diseases in countries like Papua New Guinea. So it's clear in their minds that I see people die around me. I've been told if I get this jab, then my child won't die. So let's go do this. So I think education is that maybe we're overeducated in, we have that access to social media where anyone can have an opinion. No one knows anymore what's fact or opinion. And people just are disconnected from science. And another really interesting thing, going a little bit back around, between different cultures, is that I had a long discussion in Papua New Guinea with other Westerners coming from the World Bank in Washington. And we had a long discussion about, they believed that we had to provide special protections because of Papua New Guinea's indigenous peoples. But Papua New Guinea does not recognize the International Treaty on Indigenous Peoples because they're like, we're not indigenous peoples, we're Papua New Guineans. We don't need special protections, we're all Papua New Guineans. But as Westerners say, no, you're indigenous people, so you fall under a certain article and need special protections. So I had this long discussion where I said, no, they don't sign up to that treaty. They don't see them like, am I an indigenous person of the Netherlands? And they're like, no, of course not. I said, well, that's how they see themselves. So you start having that discussion, and what angle are you coming from? And that's, I think, that cultural difference there. What are we imposing, and are we listening to what people, their perspectives, where they're coming from?
And do you think that we're actually making changes to listen to them in more detail, in more depth around what they actually value and what they care about? Or do you think that we are still, in a way, imposing what we believe the Western world thinks is right on the people of Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, I think in general that is just the difficult question. I think with a lot of these things, look at today's world where you can question a lot of things around if we have certain values or certain ways we believe are the right way. There's probably another value that someone else holds, or there's probably another way of doing something equally well or differently. And then who is the reigning culture or predominant culture to say that is the way it should be done, or that is the right value? And I think you can unpack that in many different ways. You can talk about people and place. You can talk about human rights. You can talk about all these things, about medication, about poverty. Who's to say what the right way is? And I think the best way that we can do is just, to your point, talk less and listen more, and being more open to understand where people are coming from and how they've done things. And I think if we share information and share ways of doing things, then people at least have the option to choose a different way, maybe even a better way, or say, well, my way is fine. That's been working for generations, and I choose to do that. So it's a very tricky question, I think, to do that right for us, humanity at large, and societies and cultures to decide what's wrong and what's right. I think there's some core human rights that most people would agree on, but there are definitely a lot of areas where it's harder.
Yeah, it definitely does get quite complex, and you are seeing Western influence, which in some degree is really good, right? Because it does bring that medical, it does bring science, it does bring a lot of good structures to developing infrastructure. But at the same time, when it's people's land, it can kind of over infiltrate a little bit. I just want to change direction a little bit now and go back to the kind of personal journey, because I know that all of us, once we've experienced something challenging, really creates a perspective shift. So I want to go into what it was like for you 3 years ago when you were diagnosed with cancer. It was leading up to your 40th birthday. So in the grand scheme of things, we do kind of relate to that still being a young age to be diagnosed with cancer. How did that experience impact you on just a human, personal level?
Yeah, a good question. And I think that it's an interesting way in which I tend to think about it, is that, as you said, it was only probably a month or so shy from my 40th birthday. And as Anne just said, I'm an avid trail runner. I run a lot, and I'm out there listening to audiobooks, or just kind of reflecting and thinking about life and things and what's happening. And that was one of those moments, must have been a month and a half before my 40th birthday, where I was kind of summing up a little bit in my mind around, well, I'm almost 40 now. Let's say that it's about midlife, not just, but it's a pretty decent chunk of time. How far have I gotten now? Like we spoke about that change. I think I found my place. I've left one place and I've kind of really settled here in Australia, in the Illawarra. I'm doing what I love. So I have a career around sustainability that I'm really interested in. I've work that I like. I'm engaged with, in kind of more volunteer initiatives, like I said, the trail running. I've a partner, wife, married, kids, bought a house, like tick a lot of boxes. So, that's pretty decent for the first 40 years, I thought. That's not bad. What does that next 40 years hold? So that was really what I thought about, like, what will the next 40 years kind of be like and give me? And that question was answered within, I think, a week or two of that, throwing it out into the universe. And that was, well, here's your diagnosis. Here's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a blood cancer. Good luck. Here's your 40 years. Or if you get those 40 years, see what you do with it. So I think that was quite, to me, a really interesting way of, getting an answer to that initial question I posed, I guess. The diagnosis itself is of course, the first few days a bit of a shock because you just don't know anything about it. What does it mean? What are you going to do? But quite soon, once you're over that initial shock, it's more like, okay, what's the action plan? What are we going to do? And what everyone wants to know, what's your life expectancy? And they can't really say, or at least I could say it's not that, you're going to drop that within a year, but we don't know. You're relatively young for this type of cancer to get it. So we don't know, like likely you'll get 10 to 20 years, maybe 30 years out of it, maybe 40, because we all know that cancer research is an ongoing parade of progress. So every day something new somewhere discovered. So it just depends. But we can give you, your medication, treatment course, all that. So we'll likely, if everything goes according to book, you'll be fine, but then it will come back. We just know that as well. What you've got will come back at some point in time. Then we'll have to do something else, and that depends on how soon it is. So with all those things in mind, I quite, once it was clear, I quite optimistically went into 6 months of chemotherapy, but at the end, the stem cell transplant, and then it was just after that recovery. During that whole process, I just worked mostly. And for me, it was really important to cope with it and handle is just to keep daily life as normal and close as possible. So just keep doing what we do. Like there's nothing different really. Yeah, well, I go now and then to get some treatment, but I can work when I can. Everyone does what they do. That normality, I think, helped me a lot. I think the optimism worked as well in the sense that I didn't feel really bad. So a lot of people react in different ways to chemotherapy. I felt quite all right. A bit tired, but no major side effects. So quite lucky in that sense. And they told me that the medical professional said, your textbook, it's all going exactly to plan. So within half a year, they'd done all the work and everything. And I was basically just kind of, gaining my strength again. The main thing I think out of that then is just once you start reflecting back on that question, what does the next 40 years hold? Well, that's pretty clear now that there's no guarantee, nor that there ever is a guarantee that you get another 40 years. But to me, that's now a lot more clearer that might not be likely. They just don't know. So you have to think about it then when people say, we're going to travel when we're retired. It's like, I just don't know if I ever will retire. Who knows? So it's reshaping a lot of the things that you do about like, how can I make more out of the pretty scarce amount of time I have? And likely the scarcity has increased for me versus people that haven't gone through this. So what do I do with that time? And how do I spend that well? And what do I think is well? And how do I then on a day-to-day basis as well make most of those days? And I think that's really important to shape your personal, professional life around what you hope to get out of it and what without knowing how long you've got, building something that's, I think, worthwhile in the long run, but also positive in what you want out of it in the short term. So you can't push everything forward. And I think one of the things is that to me, it was really, and it's always been, and that was really useful as well as that. And that's maybe a Dutch trait as well, that Dutch people are over-insured. They are. So I was well insured. So that was really good that I knew at the time and I know still that if, things do come to an end sooner than later, then I know that my kids and wife will be fine because I've worked all that out. But at the same time, the other part of it is, what do you leave them with? It's nice if you leave people with a bag of money, but what is really most important? And I found that I read a book that was a little bit later around Die with Zero, and that was partly financial. But what I took out of that mostly is what you really want to collect in life is not so much wealth in dollars, but it's wealth in terms of stories and experiences. That's really what you're collecting. That's transferable in the sense that, when you meet new people, and it's always like, you talk about travel and your travel experiences. You talk about the things, the experiences, the things that you've done. And if you have very limited experience, there's not a lot to talk about. Well, you can talk about work or the weather, but no one's really that interested in that. So I think to me, it's been thinking about those things, like what are the experiences that I, with my family, want to have rather sooner than later, because the sooner I know that we'll likely be able to do that, the later. Let's see. And I think that's one of the key things. It's really thinking about that on a day-to-day, week by week, month by month, year by year basis. Like, what are the things we really want to do that are important to us, and what are and something that doesn't have to be massive things. It doesn't have to be gigantic journeys, but small things, funny things where you have experiences that create stories and that you can go back to and think, oh, that was really great that we did that, or that I did that. So I think, in short, it definitely has changed my perspective on life.
Can you share a couple of those instances, like those little experiences or moments you've had with your family, or even the ones that you're looking forward to?
There are definitely a number of, and I think that there's that range between very small little things versus like the big things you can do. One of the big things is that we hadn't gone back for a long time to the Netherlands. 2 kids that are 10 and 11 now, and they're fluent in Dutch and they understand the culture and everything, but they'd never consciously been there. So that was a big thing we wanted to do, spend a good amount of time to really get them to connect with, where their parents are from and that culture and language. So we did that in July this year, 6 weeks. And that was really, I think, one of the big things that you can push that out, and you can always do that later. But it was time to do that. And I think that was also good for me to see family again, not over, a screen, but in real life, and that they could see that I was fine again after the diagnosis, the treatment, and that I was just running around literally to the dunes, and they're like, oh, he's running, that must be a good sign. So that's one of the big things. But also that touches upon one of the smaller pleasures that, like I said, I really enjoy running as a way of physical exercise, but also mental. It's also, I think, to a degree, meditative, where you really, you let everything go. You're getting into more of a, blood goes to the body, not to the mind. So everything quiets and calms. And doing that on a almost daily basis is really something, is one of the smaller things, but really important to me. Is you can wake up in the morning like, I'll run tomorrow, but I know it will be great, and I'll know it feels good. And once you get into that pattern there, it's not that hard as anyways to get out of your bed early to do that. But those things are really important. And another thing that I found is just having fun. I think that's so important, having fun with your friends, your family, and really, yes, there's time to work, but there's also time to do things together that are fun. And my son's really into Dungeons and Dragons at the moment, and really helping him through that. And there's not much that I can help because he knows it all, but just facilitating that and being there. And those things are just really fun to do that with your family, playing a lot of board games and really spending time together rather than being glued too much to screens or to other distractions. So being more mindful and in the moment, where, you see sometimes families where the kids are on a tablet and the parents are scrolling on their phone, and they might be out for dinner, but are they really together doing something? And makes you wonder. So it's being that a little bit more mindful, like what are we doing together, and are we spending our time well together, even if we're in the same room? And it doesn't mean you always have to do that. So there's a spectrum there of small to big things that you can do, and we also really love food. So it's just like having experiences with your kids as well, letting them taste different and new foods, and having fun and learning them to cook and learning them to experience those things is very worthwhile to do, both for them and for myself, in terms of that getting that value out of that in the short term, but also the experience and the memory later.
Yeah. I think when you've been diagnosed with something, it's what in that split instance, it can kind of change your perspective on life. It can bring you moments of gratitude and micro moments, things that maybe we don't look for gratefulness in, or look to find happiness in, or look to find connection, or spend more time doing this. But when you've had something that really reshapes your perspective, you're going to really start to value the things that you value the most, the family, the love, and all that type of stuff. So in terms of, I guess, the diagnosis, and then the work that you do, in one of the things that you like to do, or in the ways that you like to create impact, is from the inside. It's not necessarily advocating from the outside. It's actually getting into the weeds. It is getting into the crux of how a business operates, how it runs, and that's the space where you like to create impact. So one of the organizations you worked for was Santos, or Oil Search Limited, which to those in the outside world would seem kind of contradictory given your focus on impact, on environmental. So could you just walk us through what it is you get into, the nuts and cranny of there when you're at work, and how you want to create impact?
Yeah. And I think that's a really important question, and something that I've grappled with for a long time as well. How do you justify that to yourself more than to other people, I think? But how does that work, and what's the added value? What's the real impact? In short, it came down to, previous to joining them, I worked for, I guess, a local office of the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria, based in Geneva. They effectively pull a lot of money from countries, and the Bill Gates Foundation. All that money then is going to countries that need programs to help with those three diseases. Papua New Guinea was one of those countries. So what I helped to do was effectively make the case to the Australian government that putting $1 into that chest in Geneva is better bang for your buck than trying to run those programs yourself as a bilateral aid program. So you get more monetary value out of it because you're pooling money. You don't have to run the programs yourself. But to do that, Geneva is quite far away in Europe. They don't come here to lobby or to do high-level advocacy. So we had an office here with a well-connected person who'd been in government, who ran that, and I supported that process. But someone had to actually then go to Papua New Guinea and see how are those programs run there. They're already a recipient of that money from the Global Fund. But to make the case there, you can't come with a generic argument. You need to actually demonstrate with photos and video and stories what that money does on the ground and how that's being used. So I was sent out to go there and look at that. And at the time, there were some of those programs, but the country had a lot more money they could tap into to run a lot more programs. Initially also really focused on HIV/AIDS, which was at the time looking like going to be a big problem in Papua New Guinea. So the main issue is that the main recipient of all that money in Papua New Guinea, the Department of Health, said, we can't take all that money. We don't have the capacity to manage that money, the systems, and we're afraid that some of it might just go walkabout. So we're not comfortable taking that money. And if we don't do it, then the country doesn't get that money. Now, what can we do instead then is maybe we ask someone else to manage that money for us. And let's go to our oldest and largest company that we have in Papua New Guinea, Oil Search Limited. They already were running their own kind of level HIV/AIDS and malaria programs. So they asked them, you're already in this space. Can you manage this money for us? Just do all the groundwork around that. And also it said, well, we'll need to set up a separate foundation to do that. The Oil Search Health Foundation at the time, to take that money, manage that, run the programs. And that was around the time I was there. And they said, hey, can you join us to set up that foundation. Now, the big question then there is that if we don't do that, set up that foundation, a lot of people might die. The HIV might get out of control. The same with TB, malaria is a big issue. So we can have a massive impact on the health outcomes of people in Papua New Guinea. But at the same time, the people paying me to do this job there are the people extracting oil and gas from Papua New Guinea. So there is that internal juggling you're doing, like what's the right thing to do? And at the time, I felt that probably was better to help set up and save lives and prevent a massive HIV epidemic. But with that in mind, also thinking about, we'll have to transition oil and gas. So we'll have to find another way to more renewable energy. So initially I joined that foundation, I helped them set that up. And after a few years, came to a natural conclusion where I'd done the work I could do and we could effectively change my role into local roles. Because one of the key things as well is you want to create employment for Papua New Guineans. You don't want all the expats to come in and do all the work. You want to set it up and then hand that over and have local people run those programs and give them employment and upskill them. So it was a good time to just end that. But at the same time, then they were starting indeed what I just flagged is to look at, well, in the long term, we can't rely on oil and gas forever. We'll have to do something in renewable energy. So they're looking in Papua New Guinea at the time to set up a big biomass project. Somewhat later, with solar energy and batteries, and a lot of international banks were interested in that and supporting that. So I felt that that was a logical next step then to work on that as well. Initially set up that health response, which was very successful because that HIV pandemic or epidemic never eventuated in Papua New Guinea. So some people then say, why did we all do all the effort then? Well, that's the whole point. We did all the effort because it never eventuated. So that was really good. And in then moving over to that renewable energy space, I felt that I was now doing a thing initially that was a problematic in terms of thinking about with a fossil fuel company, but helping them get on that pathway towards partially looking at what are transition pathways to get into renewable energy.
Yeah, fascinating. It kind of leads me to another question around this, around the reality of impact work. So you've approached it from different angles, you've looked at it in different ways. What's another myth that you think people have about making a difference?
There are many probably, but there are two that come to mind. And I think the first one is that you can have impact in direct, maybe activist ways, but it depends on how you do that sometimes. Sometimes the impact is more from the outside, and that is take a Greenpeace. They're all known for their boats and being out there. They're on the front lines. Everyone knows, they're the diehard activists, and they will just stop operations. I think that's one way. That is from the outside, being loud, being clear. I think then there's the other way, and that is more driving change from the inside. That can also be a really good way as call it an activist, but someone that goes within a business and then tries to build up understanding for, like we spoke about earlier, about doing things in certain ways. What's the right way to do something? Well, there might be different ways. And driving change, building awareness, understanding, capacity to do things differently and to consider maybe around energy that there might be different pathways around how you work with energy or sustainability. So I think there are different ways of looking at how you can have impact.
Just listening to what you've shared with us, it seems that there is just so many moving parts, and maybe someone who is in a more privileged position, us for example, sat here in Australia, where we can start complaining about oil and gas because we don't have prevalence in HIV, malaria. It's very easy to pass judgment sat in the seats that we're sat in compared to someone who is in Papua New Guinea, for example. So while the company there that is providing a lot of aid and a lot of support may also be taking some of their natural resources, it's like what comes first? Is it core human needs and survival, or is it the resources? It's such a tricky situation, and it can only be shaped by, I guess, the privilege and the experience that you have in life.
Yeah, I agree on that. And I think the other way that I've thought a lot about impact is um, large impact versus small impact. I think that's a really interesting thing. And I've noticed that when I was in my early 20s, and a lot of people are still very positive about the amount of change I can bring to the world. I remember in some of the law classes, everyone wanted to be the United Nations Secretary General. That was like that. They thought that that is the ultimate way to have impact. I doubt that. But that was like how people looked at the United Nations can change the world. So if you're the Secretary General, then there you go. But there are definitely big ways, and I don't think that everyone has the opportunity to really reshape, I guess, the world order or work at that level. But I think it's important to really think about like how can you have impact on people in society in small but still meaningful ways? What are little things that you can do? And I think that is really important because sometimes you can have one person may be able to have a big impact, but most people won't have that opportunity. So then maybe it's about pulling the small impact. It's about can we get a lot of people to do little things and together they're still really changing the world, having a big impact. And that's one of the ways we're thinking now with the organization that I'm co-founded and chair at the moment for Wild Places, a outdoors sports activism organization. We found that over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a real uptake in running. We've seen a lot of people starting to run just to stay fit, be healthy. A lot of people also have gone to the outdoors. So what I mean, the trails, like into the bush. And a lot of people there are exploring certainly places that they've never been to and never realized. And I thought, this is beautiful. Like, but what are we doing to protect this place? And how do I know that my child and that generation after can still go here and celebrate this particular place? I don't actually. And I want to learn more about a particular wild place and what can I do? But I'm not the kind of person, like I said, the Greenpeace that's on the front line. I'm not the kind of person who will sit all night write a letter to my MP. But what can I do? So that's what we thought. Can we find a middle ground there where we can activate this growing movement of people that like running, that like the outdoors, and get them to connect with wild places under threat? And that can be all kind of threat, man-made or climate threats throughout Australia, and connect them with those places and bring them there if we can, to show them what that place looks like, connect them with country, with the indigenous history of the place, with the biodiversity, the value of that place, and let them experience that, explain to them, make aware what the threats to that place are, and then support existing campaigns that are already trying to protect that place. Because sometimes in that not-for-profit world, people are trying to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to set up new campaigns. There's a lot of campaigns out there, but we can bring people to those campaigns and help to raise more funds for them to do the good work. So that's one way in which I think you can build movements, people that want to do a little thing that has a little bit of impact, but that's meaningful to them. And they can do that in a few hours on a weekend. And if they're doing it while they're also exercising or doing something they love. So that's another way, I think, where impact can be kind of reshaped into something that's more manageable for people that feel that they don't have the time or understanding or resources or ability to make world-changing impact by themselves.
Yeah, amazing. I want to ask you one more question as we kind of wrap up this interview. Looking forward into your life, into the next 20, 30, 40 years, what impact would you like to make on the world?
I think that my main focus really is around empowering people to have an impact or live a good life. So I think that's one of the things that, through what we just spoke about, for Wild Places, enabling people to be able to do the things they love while also making the world a little bit of a better place. I think that's also something in a professional career around sustainability, environmental, social governance work, where you're working with people, you're working with corporations, with businesses, but ultimately you're working with people. And I think it's really interesting to go beyond the regulatory checkboxes where we'll have to report this to the government. Now, It's about why are we doing this and why are we trying to make your business more sustainable. And that is on the one hand, of course, because you want your business to be around in 40 years and want it to be profitable, and you want to keep your shareholders happy, etc. So we want to help you be aware of the risks and opportunities to your business. But equally, if not more important, we want to understand, and we want you to understand what the impacts that your business are having on people and planet, what they are. That's step one. Then step two is how do you mitigate them, or if you have positive impacts, enhance them. How do you manage them, and how through the work you're doing potentially create more value? So can you, by being aware of the impacts you're having on the world, can you mitigate negative impacts, and can you enhance positive impacts to the degree where you're actually creating shared value? You're using your systems for the bigger good. Now, taking that back to people then is talking people through this and building capacity with the people that I work with within companies to get them to understand that sustainability is not this woke concept. Now, there's actually a personal reason that the world might be a little bit of a better place, and you there within that company can contribute again a little bit to that. And it depends who you talk to. Is that someone operationally who can make a small change, and a lot of people can do that, or is this a key decision maker, a director or a C-suite person who says, now that I get it, actually we can change course? And a good example is worked with a resource company that was looking at fracking projects in Mongolia, gas extraction. Now, some people say gas, it's a transition fuel, it's not as bad as the other fossil fuels, but it's still a fossil fuel. But once we went through that understanding around long-term outcomes, energy transition, sustainability, there certainly were all these other opportunities that that company became aware of. Solar projects in Mongolia, biomass projects, more renewable energy focused projects instead of just the fracking. So by having the conversation with someone and giving them that information, you're really empowering them to do the right thing for people and planet in the long term. So I think going back to your question, that is what I hope to have. The impact I hope to have is to empower people to also unlock the innate impact that they could be having. And by giving them that opportunity to reframe it for, I will never be able to make an impact because I'm not that Secretary General, I'm not the CEO, I'm not a big decision makers. Even small decision makers can together make a lot of impact.
I think, Tim, it's been beautiful to, first of all, hear your story and the adversity you've been to. You've always kind of been someone who's wanted to create impact, and you've been through your own personal journey of diagnosis of cancer, and you've been navigating through that, and still you have this big belief around the cross collaboration, because that's what it takes to create impact. No one can do it alone. We all have to kind of collaborate and achieve that together.
Well, thanks for joining us, Tim. If you would like to know more about Tim or connect with him, he is on LinkedIn, or you could follow For Wild Places on Instagram. We'll share the links in the captions.
Thanks for listening to Out of Place. If something in today's episode resonated with you, let us know or share it with someone who might need it too.
Or leave us a review on Apple, a rating on Spotify, or like and comment on YouTube. It matters more than you know. We're so grateful to be building this alongside you. To learn more or connect with us, head to Instagram and look for Out of Plaece, spelled Plaece.
Here's to finding your own way, even when it feels a little out of place. We'll see you on the next episode.